We're going to start today talking about rituals. So, as we think about this, I want you to think about how rituals particularly apply to families. They, of course, apply to lots of different things in lots of different contexts. But just remember as we do this that we're talking about families. And so I want you to think about how rituals work in families. Now, uh, some basic stuff here about what a ritual is and how we're going to think about it. Rituals occur. Here's something I think from Ember Black. Rituals occur episodically. That means they're not constant. They happen from time to time. They have symbolic meaning. That's an important quality of calling something a ritual. And they're valued in such a way such that we kind of tend to want them to happen again. Um, Secondly, there you see from Wallen and Bennett that rituals reflect family traditions sometimes. They're related to cultural, religious, ethnic perspectives or practices. They remind us that communication can be symbolic. I really like this phrase, that form gives us meaning. I think that's a good thing, and I think we can see how that works with families. That repetition promotes learning, and that the past is embedded in the present. I really like that that kind of conglomeration of ideas there. Symbolic communication, form that gives us meaning, and repetition that promotes learning. So I think that makes sense to me in terms of thinking about what family rituals might be. And then you see there at the end from Doherty that rituals are social interactions that are repeated, coordinated, and significant. A little bit simpler. All good definitions, but we'll probably come back to some of those ideas as we go. So if we think about what a ritual is, we just looked at three definitions. You can kind of come up with one on your own and think about what it means to you. When I usually ask people, what do you think is what's a ritual? We come up with lots of different stuff, from things that we do with maybe a spouse or partner or family, to things that we do in churches, things that we do as a society. So there are lots of things that there's this broad spectrum of things that sometimes are included as rituals. And that's okay. We don't have to have this perfect, neat little definition of what it is. It's okay if it's a little bit unmanageable, because we want to think kind of about the principles and the properties of it more than trying to come up with a perfect definition. So let's think about who needs a ritual. Some of us feel like we don't need ritual. Now, I want you to think a little bit about that idea. Does everybody need ritual in the same way? Or there are those of it who need it more than others? If you just think about your life and just the people that you know, you can probably say, you can probably classify folks a little bit in terms of people who seem to love ritualistic things and people who don't. Some people seem to really thrive on the form and function of ritual. Doing things repeatedly, doing things that are symbolic. Others of us maybe think, well, I don't like stuff that's just purely symbolic. I want the real thing. When I think about this, very often I think about my response over my lifetime to communion in church. Or I grew up as a Baptist, so if you're like me, then you grew up calling it the Lord's Supper and not communion. That's the way we used to talk about it. I think we did that because communion sounded too much like Catholicism, and Baptists were terrified of Catholicism. And so, because Catholics use the word communion or Eucharist or something like that, we were going to call it the Lord's Supper. It was a good Southern way of saying that we're going to take communion, I think. So, I can remember as I grew up in the Baptist church, when we had communion, first of all, we had it once a quarter. I don't know why we decided to have it once a quarter. That meaning, once every 3 months of the year. I don't know why. Nobody could ever tell me why. It seemed to me like it ought to be something that you did maybe more often than that. But that's when we did it. When we did it, it would be on a Sunday night, because after all, it was supper. And we kind of felt like Jesus had done that at night, and so we would have it at night and on a Sunday night, and you would go into the sanctuary, and it would be on the communion table down there. There would be those kind of chrome, shiny chrome trays of little tiny wafers and little tiny plastic cups of grape juice, and they would be stacked up in those things that you ordered from some church supply company, and they'd be covered with a white tablecloth. And it always kind of creeped me out a little bit, because when I'd walk in there when I was little especially, it reminded me of a funeral. It reminded me of somebody laying down there in a casket. And so I never liked it. It always made me feel creepy and a little bit spooky. And I know that's my problem, probably more than the church's. But because of all of that, and because when they served it, it was these tiny little squares of unleavened bread that tasted and felt a little bit like a piece of old cardboard in your mouth. And then we had this unsweetened, warm grape juice. And I didn't understand that either, because I didn't know anything about drinking wine, but I knew that the grape juice that we had at communion was really sour and distasteful. I don't know why we thought, we're not going to use wine, so let's use unsweetened grape juice. That just made no sense to me, and it doesn't make any sense to me looking back. If you're going to use a grape juice, why not use a grape juice that tastes good? But anyway, that's my own personal little rant. I grew up then with this kind of a distaste for that. This kind of feeling of like, it's just stupid. It's in these big chrome dishes. Everybody stands around silent like they're at a funeral, waits for the preacher to give these signals, and then we all at one time eat this horrible little cracker, and then the preacher says something else, and then all of us at one time drink this terrible little cup of juice. It just never connected with me. It never meant anything to me. So I really grew up, until I was a young adult at least, just thinking, I don't care anything about that. It's meaningless to me. And I don't want to throw stones too much at my traditional church that I grew up in, but I do think that because of the way it was done, it never connected with a lot of us. So I grew up that way. Well, after I got older and I got into some situations in churches and other places where people did communion in a very different way, where we talked about it more, we thought about what it meant and what it was, and we actually passed around a piece of bread, and everybody took a piece of bread, and some places we actually drank wine, and we drank sometimes from a cup, or we dipped the bread in the cup, and all those different kinds of things that we can do. But it was very much more communal, and it became something that was meaningful to me, and still to this day I enjoy that process, and it means something to me. I feel very, very different when I take communion now. And so over the course of just my life, and I'm just one person, it doesn't mean anything except that's just my experience. But over the course of time, my opinion of what this ritual was and whether I needed it or not has really shifted and changed. And so I think that there are a lot of us that maybe because of the way ritual is presented to us, maybe because of our experiences with certain rituals, we decide that they're bad or wrong or useless. Others of us, because rituals have been presented in really healthy ways and have been really valuable and meaning to us, seem just desperately important. And so we want to hang on to them. So I don't know if we all need rituals in the same way, or if that's something that's kind of personality based. But I do know that we seem to have different levels of need for it from person to person. Some of us maybe need a little more structure, and rituals provide structure. And so if you're a person that really thrives on structure, ritual may be more important to you. If you're somebody that really doesn't care for structure, ritual may not be. On the other hand, it may be that we don't always know exactly what we need. And like me, you may really have an empty spot there where if the ritual is presented correctly or done well, you would feel much more like you needed it. So we'll come right back and we'll talk about that.